Previously, we placed our rough primitive version of the house throughout the level, and now we're going to use proxy meshes to create one standardized layout for an entire worker house that we can replicate throughout the whole level, saving us a lot of time and effort. So we already know the basic footprint for our worker house here. We're going to do a little bit of work first with the floor mesh to establish the foundation for each house, but instead, based on some photo reference that I have, I'm going to work on the house facade a little bit. It's a very modest dwelling. It has 2 stories, but not really very many rooms. So I'm going to establish very quickly the facade here where the entrance door is. It's a little bit offset to the right. There's kind of an extra wide, maybe 2-story window there. It won't be a standard 4x4 based on what I see. I don't want it to be too big. So it's instead going to be not 8 meters across in the front, but instead 9 meters. So here I'm just sort of building out the side of the house. There's not a lot of windows in it. Most of the windows are in the front and in the back. That seems to square pretty reasonably, believably well with a lot of these kinds of modest worker houses that I've seen. We will give it one possible exit out the back of the house. Again, later we can decide which of these houses are accessible, which are not, and we can close off, board up windows, whatever we need to do based on this one standardized floor plan. Here I'm using the corner meshes at each corner of the house. Just seems to work well in this particular case. Going with some simple walls again on that side. Okay, so that's our basic entry and exit points. Just delete the original rough primitive now. I don't think I need it anymore. I'm going to select all these really quickly and make sure everything's aligned well and add it to a new layer for my house. You have to remember, though, if you keep creating meshes in a layer like this, you will have one layer for all your houses, not one for each house. That would require you to make it more specifically set up that way. So here I just quickly fleshed out more floor meshes. There'll be an entry staircase visible from the front door going up the right side of the house. It will extend from the ground floor, kind of the front room or living room, up to the top of the stairs here, and then it'll have a small landing and then a turn, which allows it to reach the top floor. One really long staircase is a little weird in houses like this. Here I'm adding in some more of our proxy floor meshes. It's worth noting that the upstairs floor of this house, as is common in a lot of these sort of more modest worker houses, it's not a complete 4-meter high upstairs wall. In fact, the walls upstairs are only partially reaching to the ceiling. They probably go only part way. And then the sloping angles of the roof actually come in on some of the rooms in the upstairs. So that's something we're going to have to do a little bit of readjustment to the scaling of the wall meshes up here on the second floor. Here I'm just swapping them in. Some of them will be full height because they will be, well, the ones in the front and back of the house will likely be more full height. I'm also putting in a couple small windows, twin windows. As I mentioned, this was evident in my photo reference. So I'm putting in a couple windows up here, nothing too big. And I'm just sort of trying to create a little bit of a step-like series of walls here. This will require honestly some fussing to get this right, just because of the way that the roof slopes in. And like I said, kind of encroaches over the tops of the low walls. So that's kind of what I'm talking about there. That's a common thing you would see. It'd be a little weird if the roof started at the very top of the second floor in this kind of a small house. That it would look a little strange. So I'm trying to make this seem fairly believable. Again, to try to make it seem obvious that there's some research done into the environmental storytelling of the kind of town this was, the kind of houses that were built, etc. Here I'm just using one of our shape meshes, the shape wedge mesh particularly. Getting it to align is a little bit odd because I think it has some kind of offsets in its pivot points. But I'm just using this here to make this sort of triangular facade under the overhanging roof. That seems to work out okay. I can do the same in the back and kind of duplicate some of these walls, hopefully. Here I'm going to shrink it just to make another wedge and fill in that gap and invert it there and fill in the gap on the other side. Again, there's always a little bit of fussing to do here to make this work. Sometimes you might find yourself going a little bit overboard, but I feel like, say there's supposed to be gameplay in the space and you don't want a gap in the wall where somebody could throw a grenade through, for instance, then, you kind of have to make sure it's there for at least for gameplay reasons, if not just for a clean interpretation of the reality you're trying to convey in your level. Here we go. I'm just duplicating some of these wall meshes. You can see I've scaled them down a little bit to 0.875 on the Z. I'm going to scale this up a little bit here, close off the rear facade of the building. I guess it's not a facade if it's on the rear of the building, but I'm going to close up the rear walls of the house anyway. Just playing with this a little to align this properly. That's probably too much time to spend on a roof, but it definitely gets our point across. If I scale it a little bit, try to align it. Obviously, something got thrown a little bit out of whack there. And here I'm going to do a little bit of work on the porch. Again, this is something from the photo reference that I thought would be a cool thing to include. It also makes kind of a nice transition. If the player is able to enter these houses, it makes an interesting transition inside the space to go across the porch and then inside the front door. It might be useful as well to sort of create a more interesting silhouette on the house when seen from a distance. I looked through a lot of different houses to try to determine the style of house this would be, how they look from a distance, etc. Some look more modest than this, some look more extravagant, but I feel like this one works pretty well. I just scaled up a prism pyramid there to add kind of a bit of an angle to the roof. Again, maybe more detail than we need in that particular case, but again, trying to convey a certain style of house pretty clearly, especially to an art team that might have to build the fully realized version of these worker houses. I feel like if you can avoid having them do extra work to make your vision a reality, then you save them time, you save yourself time, you make sure your gameplay works the best in the spaces that you build. So that's our exterior porch. Now I'm going to do a little bit of subdivision here on the inside of the house. Like I said, it's a modest house. It's not even very big, so we can't do too many rooms. There's kind of one major dividing wall that divides like a front living room area to maybe a kitchen in the back, or maybe a kitchen dining room in the back even. Here just doing a little bit of alignment work, fixing up the staircase. This is set up where I'm adding a door back here. This could either be a pantry, could be a pantry space to explore. If you did want to make it a little more extravagant, typically this could be where there's an entrance to a basement. But I think for these houses, we're going to leave it as kind of a utilitarian closet. So that's about all we really need for the ground floor. Just making sure my meshes are added to the layer here. Make it easy to grab these things. Here I'm just moving it a little bit. I'm going to have a quick playthrough, see how it feels to run around in what I have so far. It's a nice clean entrance into the front. Right here, there's a cool node where you can see your two path choices. You can go upstairs, you can go into the back room, maybe out the back door. That's a pretty clean arrangement of paths. This is one giant open area that feels a little strange, a little warehousey, frankly. I think we can do better. I think we can probably subdivide the top of the house a little bit more. So again, if I go back here, I could do a bit of exploration back there. Need a little bit of a staircase in the back if we want the player to get out the back as well. So I'm just going to add that in, duplicating the one we already had in the front. And here I'm just going to slide this upstairs so I can align my walls quickly that way. I might want to move these around a little more. Here I'm going to add a couple rooms, like kind of a front bedroom, maybe where parents would have slept, maybe like a small bedroom for children in the back. If these were workhouses a long time ago, there likely wouldn't even have been a bathroom in this house. It probably would have been an outhouse if it was like a turn-of-the-century house in a mill town in the middle of nowhere. So here we go. I'm just dividing this up a little, adding like the indication of a railing here. And this part's pretty easy. Building, again, the enclosing roof structure that attaches to the top of these walls. That's a little bit awkward and weird, but we're just going to muddle our way through it with a little bit of mix of some scaled meshes, proxy meshes, and probably some shape meshes. Here we go. Well, we can add in here, moving the roof down a little. Here I'm just adding those wedge meshes in because they relatively meet with the boundaries of the roof. Like I said, if your game involves shooting and combat, and like if you didn't want players to be able to, like I said, throw grenades through these little gaps, then obviously you may not have to do this. But as a rule of thumb, it's always better to not leave question marks in your level design. And if you leave gaps, people might think that you're indicating that you need specific breaks in the wall there for gameplay reasons. So it's best to really just cover your bases, build things thoroughly like I'm trying to do right here, so that they indicate, as well as they possibly can, they indicate the exact bounds of playable space that you need. Here I'm just going to scale this up a little bit, maybe make this a support beam that crosses the length of the ceiling there. do a little bit of alignment fixes. It seems okay. It's not the prettiest thing in the world, but it works. So if we go here through the front of our house, you can see how this all plays out. We go through here, into the kitchen area. We have a staircase. Obviously, that's not a good location for a staircase. So we'll have to move this house after we've finished building it. If we go up here, we see the railing works okay. Seems pretty believable. This room here to explore seems like a decent small room, maybe a closet. And this is kind of a decent bedroom with kind of maybe a possibly interesting view out the windows. That could be good for gameplay as well. That's something that we can use to our advantage and iterate on later on. Now that we have this house built, we're fairly happy with it. It's got a few rough edges, but it's pretty good. Now we can grab the entire house, now that it's grouped, and position it exactly where we want it. We can now also duplicate it and position this duplicated proxy house in the rough blockout spaces we established before. So here I'm keeping an eye on the POV camera where I can, also trying to imagine that having these facades face the player at certain angles is more pleasing visually. It's more descriptive of the house than approaching it from, a 90-degree angle like we originally were. So here I'm angling it at roughly, I don't even know, it may be a 45-degree, maybe a little less, maybe a little more. So I placed it up on a little bit more of a hill. I'm building like a little bit larger set of stairs to reach it that wind up to it. If this is a place built like in steep mountains, then these stairs might be more interesting. It might be kind of more even believable that they were built this way. Okay, I'm just going to keep manipulating the cube meshes that we used for our basic rough blockout of the landscape. I'm just sort of aligning them here, setting the stage for another duplication of the next house mesh. Going up the hill a little bit, we want it on another plateau. Looks like it's intersecting a little bit with the rocks there, but again, we'll have to mess with that a little bit later. Just trying to reestablish the relationships between each of these houses here, one at a time. And again, keeping an eye on how they look in the POV camera. They look pretty good. You can see like each one sort of peeking out behind the next one. And here I'm just sort of adjusting the sort of rocky mountainous terrain we had, forming the sort of backyard area of each worker house. Some of these were a little much. Some of these needed to be sort of backed up because the house ended up being a little bit bigger than the initial rough blockout that we did. But not too bad. We can fit most of these in here pretty well without too much trouble. Still looking pretty good in the POV camera. Need a little more room behind each one. Again, we'll have to decide later how much space we want to be traversable behind each house, if at all. Typically speaking, I'd prefer not at all. We can place more like natural terrain that blocks the player there, some foliage once a sort of a foliage pass is done on the level, or just straight up fences would work well. So this is the final house at the top of the hill. Yeah, we can see it ended up being quite a bit bigger than the original, but luckily still quite fine. They still work out quite well, size-wise in relation to each other and in relation to the surrounding environment. I'm going to take these rocks, slide them back as well. This whole kind of mountain outcropping. I want to ensure that the terrain here continues to frame the town hall building as I intended. It seems like it does for the most part. But yeah, it's sort of like moving one of the rocks sort of forces movement of all the rocks, I guess. Okay, so that looks all right from that perspective. So we're positioned here in this playthrough at the mill exit, and we can see as we run down this route how everything fits together, how all the new houses are positioned. Already I feel like I can see through the garage openings in the mill exit a little too early. Also, there's a little bit of excess space to the left there we'll have to figure out how to close up. But we're going to pay attention to the houses along the road. I like how they're all angled towards the road. I feel like they seem interesting places to explore. We'll have to figure out later which ones we want to close up, which ones we want to remain open. We could even have a path that leads through one house, around a blockage in the road, and then maybe back through another house to go around the blockage in the road. This house up here at the top's kind of interesting to leave open. It has a good view of the town hall from the upstairs window, which could be kind of interesting if the gameplay involves the player having a sniper rifle at any point. Maybe if there's some enemies preventing entrance into the town hall, they could actually be sniped from the upstairs window. So that gives us a lot of options based on this modular layout of the individual worker houses.